Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our new series, How to Win, which is a creation in partnership by the SportsPro team and, of course, NorthStar Solutions Group, where we speak to industry leaders on how they achieve success off the field of play and in the boardroom, so to speak. Now, before I introduce our guest for this week's pod, I'm thrilled to be joined once again by NorthStar Solutions Group CEO, Chris Collins. How are you doing, Chris?
Hi, Nick. Doing well. Excited to be back and really looking forward to today's session.
We were just talking before we started the recording, and you were mentioning the fact that you're basically based just outside of Philadelphia, which, in my view, in America is probably I'm trying to think of the right word here. It's not the right way to say it. The most dense part of the US when it comes to sports, professional sports teams and fandom. It's just like it's on steroids in that sort of precinct or in those respective states. How do you find the dynamic there, being that you're not actually from the area? Is it intense as it looks like from outside of the US?
Oh, it definitely is. So Philadelphia, like other major cities, New York, Boston, I mean, they have full-fledged major sports teams across the major sports in the US. And, each kind of fan base has their own personality. And so it's really interesting to be here. I've been in the Philadelphia area for a while. So there's some aspects of getting on with the local teams, but then also kind of growing up in a different area. It brings in that dynamic of who do you root for and how public are you when you're rooting for them. But I've been able to manage through that.
Good stuff. Well, we can talk about that in another pod down the line, because I'm always intrigued about the US fandom side of things. But let's jump straight into this week's episode with our guest, who I'm really excited to speak with. His name is Jon Dutton, who is the Chief Executive of British Cycling, and previously was the Chief Executive of the Rugby League World Cup 2021. And as someone who works at a company like SportsPro, have followed his journey and particularly his respective organization's journey over the last few years. That they've had some really incredible moments and also some challenges along the way. So, Jon, really good to have you on the show. And obviously, we talked about before we kicked off this briefing, the briefing call prior to this recording, it feels for me, I'm not sure how it feels for you. It could feel like a lot longer, but it feels only just yesterday that you joined British Cycling, but already a lot of interesting moves that you've made to take the organization forward. So, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, Chris. My pleasure. It feels actually like a long time. It's been 18 months in position at British Cycling. Time goes quickly, doesn't it? And we only have to reflect on the summer with the Olympics and Paralympics and all the things that have happened. But very happy over the next minutes to reflect on the journey and both challenge and opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, before we jump into the British cycling side of things, because there is quite a bit I want to dig into and some recent announcements that have been made, you did a great job. I think one of the things you did really well when you were involved in your Rugby League World Cup role was really to tell the story of both rugby league, but also the different initiatives you were looking to achieve, and really bringing, I guess, the whole industry with you to understand the why and the purpose you were trying to bring to that event. And I think, quite frankly, I wouldn't just say this because you were on the show, but I think you really put that event on another level, with another level just generally in terms of interest, awareness, both from an industry support perspective, but also how you were able to, I guess, show the rest of the industry a different way to look at running major events, particularly for those underneath the top tier. Talk us through the decision-making on how you got to the place where you decided, look, historically, the Rugby League World Cup was typically run as sort of different events, both from the wheelchair version of the game and the men's and the women's. How did you come to the decision to bring all that together?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. We took a bold and brave decision. The easy decision was to simply replicate and run the men's tournament as had happened for many years before. And it is worth saying that the Rugby League World Cup, the men's edition, has existed since 1954. So I think it's the second oldest sporting team tournament. But for us, it was about running a purposeful event, so a social impact program of which I remain incredibly proud of. What we achieved was as important as what happened on the field of play, but we brought together men, women and wheelchair athletes, 61 games, over 37 days, underpinned by that meaningful impact in local communities. So yeah, great deal of determination, great amount of ambition. Certainly wasn't straightforward. We had more than a few bumps in the road, not least postponements. But yeah, I reflect back and a lot of that I've carried through into my role at British Cycling, that in particular events should exist for more than what happens on the field of play. And if you can deliver an event, a great event, amazing athlete experience, but it delivers social value, then that for me is definitely the way forward.
And you definitely brought that into the British cycling approach from what I've heard you talk about. But before we move on to that just yet, I'm curious as to the uniqueness of rugby league. For those that don't follow rugby league, someone who's Australian who knows rugby, myself knows rugby league very closely. It's depending on who you ask and in what state in Australia, it's the number one football code depending on what state you're in. Number two, otherwise following the AFL, and it's a commercial powerhouse in markets like Australia. Rugby league's had its ups and downs commercially in the UK, from what I've seen, in terms of it was probably in a more prominent position from a visibility standpoint 10 plus years ago. Where did it get to at the point that you decided to join the Rugby League World Cup? Was it at a point where, and I guess if you could explain for our listeners that the challenges around a sport that it's international, but it's commercial and decision-making power is really within the two, Australia and England largely. How difficult was that to navigate? And what is some of the complexities that come with that sort of environment, I suppose?
Yeah, gosh, it's a really good question. Maybe a podcast in its own right, Nick. Rugby League has existed since 1895, many will say. Before that, the split between Rugby League and Rugby Union, a sport here in the north of England, born in the north, 23, 24 clubs sat around the table in Huddersfield, and a sport that's really struggled to get resonance across the rest of the UK. In Australia, as you say, the NRL actually at the moment are going gangbusters. They've got an amazing product. They're really challenging the AFL, but largely it's existed internationally between the UK, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand and France. So our opportunity was to take it to new territories. We had Brazil, the first ever South American team play. We had Greece, an amazing story that actually Rugby League was banned in Greece, made illegal, and through the work that the tournament did, they were able to play on home soil after the tournament, and so on and so forth. So I think a sport that's constantly faced challenge and had to dig deep in terms of resilience, and we put it on a sporting platform, every game, every minute of every game live on the BBC here, big audience back in Australia, the amazing story of Samoa men who made it all the way to the final, and more. And we know in the Pacific in particular, Samoa, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, a country of 8 million people where rugby league is the national sport. And I hope that what we left behind, other people will pick up and take the joy of rugby league, talk about the joy of cycling, but the joy of rugby league to many more people. It's a wonderful sport. I've just finished my 45th season as a season ticket holder of my club, and just the athletes on the field of play, they are better than ever before. As you say, Nick, the commerciality of the sport, it's really struggled to break through, and not least other sports now innovated, short form, private investment, all of those things. Rugby league is now in a much more crowded market than it was when it was first established in 1895.
So John, I want to jump into the delay of the event, which obviously was a huge curveball for you. Chris, but before we do that, I want to bring you in here a little bit, because one of the things that I think John's sort of understated a little bit was quite a significant move, I think, for any sports event, really, that I can't think of too many that have done it, where they've made a big decision of quite a big transformation of how they deliver the events and bringing the three different disciplines effectively together to bring one event. Now, through your experience as someone who works with companies on delivering strategy and consulting them on making big decisions on their approach and strategy, what are some like advice or tips or thoughts you would have on like what's the approach to come to a major decision and actually get all stakeholders to go, yeah, let's do that. Let's actually make the shift, because it might have been a no-brainer in some instances. Jon might play it down, but I know how tricky the stakeholder landscape is in sports, and that can be tricky to get the right people on board with you. And that can be in a corporate setting, but definitely in sports. What's your view, Chris, on how do you get to a point where you can go, like, that's the strategy we're gonna go ahead with it, and then kick that into gear?
Yeah. Well, like Jon said, that could be a podcast in and of itself. But to simplify it, I think you brought it up, Nick. I think shared purpose becomes a really critical aspect there, right? So as you're establishing that vision and the desired end state and shared goals, those kind of become the what, right? But the equally important, if not more important, is the why. Why are we doing this? You rally people around the why. You can then figure out where those kind of shared purposes are. You get kind of transparency there, so you can leverage that and set that kind of as the bedrock of moving forward. And then you don't have to kind of consistently worry about that, which then allows you to be able to kind of focus on maybe some areas where you do have competing stakeholder interests. And even having that shared purpose helps with that kind of negotiation of those different interests, because you can then align it to, or map it back to, are those interests really aligned to where we want to go and the shared purpose that we have? And so that can help in that negotiation rather than just kind of dealing with it on face value, right? Because then people get territorial. And if you can bring that shared purpose out and get that transparency, then it becomes harder for somebody to argue against something that clearly doesn't support the overall vision and the overall purpose of what you're collectively trying to achieve.
Jon, how does that sound to you? Does that resonate a little bit?
Yeah, it resonates a lot. I absolutely agree with what Chris has said. I reflect back. We started the project, the Rugby League World Cup, in 2015. It was ultimately delivered in 2022. We had a pandemic in the middle of that, so fair to say the environment changed somewhat. But we remained resolute that when we started the project, it was purpose-led. Our mission was to deliver the biggest, best and most inclusive Rugby League World Cup ever. And we constantly measured all of our decisions against that. We had a brilliant chair, a fantastic board. And I remember some of the really tough decisions, including whether we were going to postpone, cancel or continue with the tournament. And it's based on values. And it's easy to talk about values being amazing words, that you've got to live and breathe them. And our values were authenticity, making sure that whatever we said, we got on and did. World class, we always aspire to being that. But the really important value for me, as well as being inclusive, which was the third one, the fourth one was to be bold and brave. And that courageous spirit, it was there on day one, and we had to carry it through. So everything that Chris has said, it's really easy, and very happy to talk about we're writing a new strategy at British Cycling, but to have clarity, but to continue to go back to what you said, whether it's your vision, your mission, or indeed your purpose. It's easy to forget it after you've done all that amazing strategy work, but if you bring it to life and live and breathe it, that itself develops a culture and hopefully delivers success.
Well, let's jump into what you're doing in British Cycling now, because I think we've touched upon the fact that you went through the Rugby League World Cup changes, and now since then you've now moved on to this role, which is for those that aren't based in the UK, I'm not sure the exact status of it now, Jon, but it's definitely one of the top national governing bodies in terms of various metrics, being scale, funding, performance, you name it. It's right up there with some of the largest in the country. Talk us through the decision to join that organisation, and what's been the focus when you walked in the door. What's been the real priority since you accepted that role?
Yeah, I mean, the recruitment process came just after the Rugby League World Cup, and I remember my first interview and the usual question, why do you want the job? And I said it's serendipity. First of all, the sport I love, have grown up watching the Tour de France, a Tour de France super fan. Cycling's an amazing sport. It's, of course, a life skill. It's a form of transport, and it gives joy, whether it be leisure, recreation, or sport. Secondly, it was about challenge. It's fair to say the challenges of British cycling are well documented, financial, reputational, etc. And I really walk towards the challenge. And the third one is British Cycling are based in Manchester. We ran a Rugby League World Cup from Manchester, and I'm a big fan of the north of England, and just really special that a non-London centric, big, as you say, national governing body operating out of the north of England. So those were the three reasons, and the serendipitous nature. And the challenges, I mean, that my chair, Frank Slevin, who I met during the recruitment process, was just completely transparent about the challenges that I was walking into. And that was fantastic because it enabled me to hit the ground running and to approach them head on. And it's fair to say 18 months later, we have tackled many of our challenges and turned them into opportunities. But the job is far from done. And I really thrive on the ability to make a difference. I constantly talk about my job description. I have no idea what it says, Nick. To me, it just says make a difference. And other people will be the judge of that. Actions speak louder than words. So in the very early days, I guess when I address the workforce and some of our stakeholders, maybe a high degree of cynicism, maybe a degree of skepticism, and that role modelling piece as a leader is really important. Getting on, doing things, backing them up with meaningful actions, and that's been my approach over the last 18 months.
Jon, so can you paint a bit of a picture of the scale of British cycling, both from an organisational perspective, but perhaps also the scale of cycling in the UK? Because one of the things that struck me when we talked before jumping on this is you were quick to talk about cycling as a leisure, as a mode of transport. Everyone, how much cycling touches the wider society and not just through the lens of sport itself. So just talk us through how you would paint the scale or the picture of the NGB, both at an organisational and a participatory level.
Yeah, and we talk about an onion ring, Nick. So if you take the population of the UK, almost 70 million people, our quarterly market tracker, the last time we measured, showed about 27 million people had ridden a bike in the UK in the last 12 months, or about a third of the population, which is a really significant number. If you then go down to the next sort of concentric layer, we have about 1 million people in our ecosystem, and that's made up of our members, about 140,000. People that compete, people that have experienced our events and community rides. So the market opportunity for British cycling, 1 million to 27 million, is really significant. And we're on a journey of commercialisation, of also modernisation, and a big part of that is delivering events. And we recently delivered the Tour of Britain Women and Tour of Britain Men, and we know we reached lots of people. I think we reached about 1 million people on that journey. The reality is we have no idea who those people are. The bike race passes by, people have a great experience, you don't buy a ticket. So that's one of the conundrums that we're trying to work out. But in terms of the size and scale of cycling as a whole, and we, not just in the UK, but look at other populations, we're actually doing some international relations work, both with China and with India. And in both nations, it probably is the main form of transport. So it's to go through sort of people riding to work all the way through to our Great Britain team, which has just come back from Paris with 33 medals between the Olympic and Paralympic squads, and everything that sits in between. And we actually govern 7 different disciplines. So it's not just one sport. And cycling, beyond the 7 disciplines that we govern, there are many, many other variations. So it's an enormous sport. It's an enormous opportunity. And we're just sort of navigating our way through the modernisation programme at every single level.
Mm. Chris, I want to bring you in here because I'd be curious to get your take before I ask Jon this question. So normally it's chicken and egg. Normally I might ask Jon this first. Sometimes I might ask you, Chris. But let's play a bit of a hypothetical game. You know, Jon joined the organisation. It's quite vast. There's a lot of different layers to it, as Jon's just run through for us. Let's play the hypothetical scenario that you're working alongside of him to try and help work out a craft a strategy on how to approach the running of the organisation and the strategy of moving forward. What are some of those major steps that you would be saying you need to focus on in the first 30, 60, 90 days, let's say, of how to ensure you're across the right parts of the organisation and how to get that development of the strategy? Let's not say the strategy complete, because that's probably going to take a lot longer, but how do you get to a place where you're comfortable knowing enough detail to move forward with developing a strategy? Because the risk, in my view, would be you can start getting a bit too strategic too soon if you don't know the full lie of the land and how the stakeholder dynamic works. So what's your view on all that?
Yeah, I think it starts with the upfront assessment. Like, what do you know? What don't you know? What do you need to know? And so you can take the stuff that you know and map that and come up with at least a starting point from that. You can understand the areas maybe that you don't know enough about and put together mechanisms to be able to create some discovery and information that you can then make forward decisions on. And then even trying to assess the areas that, there may be areas that you don't know. And those are tough, but trying to get a clear understanding up front and then putting, again, the right level of plan and the right mix of planning and action in place so that you can act on what you know and be confident in that. You can take action to know more, collect information and assess that, and build that kind of agile process around being able to constantly be going through, act on what you know, collect information, reassess, maybe replan a little bit or be flexible in terms of what you do. I think the other key aspect in there that is somewhat overlooked is what's your decision support plan that you overlay over your strategy and clearly acting on that, because good execution is really about good decision making and aligning lower level decisions with higher level decisions so that everything's kind of really synergistic, so to speak, allowing for decentralized or enabled lower levels that can make decisions and act on what they need to and be confident that it's contributing to higher goals and maybe not becoming an obstacle or taking the organization differently. So I think kind of to circle back to the original, that upfront assessment of kind of, what do we already know that we can act on? What do we need to know that we don't have the right information for? And how do we go about getting it? And then kind of that risk management planning, or what are some things that maybe we don't know that we don't know, and how are we going to account for those in our overall strategy and execution?
Interesting. And Jon, from your point of view, I imagine some of the things that Chris has laid out there would have definitely been on your radar. A part of it, having to talk to a lot of people, I would have thought would have been a pretty big part of it. Just what was that like? Did you have to, how much time did you spend talking to people at the elite level, the grassroots level, the board, the current staff? What was that mix like of or not just talking to people, but like on the mix of time you were sort of thinking, did you have a framework you tried to follow to make sure you're talking to enough of the right people to get a full sense of what you had to prioritize on?
Yeah, I think in the early days, it was to try and establish a rhythm and routine, to try and be visible, particularly in the workplace, but also to get out and see people. So, building on what Chris has said and acknowledging I regard myself as the bus driver. So I am surrounded by a really talented executive and a very supportive board. So I'm very privileged in that. But in the very early days, we, on the discovery phase, identified areas that would take the organisation forward. So we're delivering a programme of change. We, in the early days, appointed a director of change, but we'd done the thinking before bringing the individual in, and it was predicated on financial or commercial revenue. And there were two aspects of that. One was brand and reputation, and one was customer, in particular that deep customer understanding. The third area, which probably was the starting point, was purpose. So we developed a new purpose. Our purpose at British Cycling is to bring the joy of cycling to everyone. And that, for me, celebrates the ubiquity of cycling. We also believe that was commercially compelling, and we've had success off the back of that. But also, it's quite hard to disagree as an organisation to bring the joy of cycling. It's not very contentious. It's actually celebratory. And then the two other areas were our events. We called it Project Flagship, but using events to create visibility and deliver social impact. We have a brand new 5-year event vision. We have a brand new social impact programme. And then the final area, I guess no surprise to anyone, was digital transformation, and we're still on that journey. So I love simplicity. Our strategy will be a strategy on a page, and that's what we will share with people. Our programme of change fits on a page. So in the early days, as well as all that discovery work and getting out and seeing people, it was to really clearly articulate the things that we were prepared to do. And I think that's been really galvanising to the workforce. As ever, we get things wrong. We learn from our mistakes. Inevitably, some people might not quite agree with the things we're doing, but the broad principles of regaining financial stability, rebuilding reputation in areas that needs enhancing, really understanding customers in that widest possible sense, or customers to me can we get to 27 million? Can we get to the whole population? And then having all the systems and processes that sits underneath that to support it. And of course, we are people, we are human beings, and never ever losing sight of that. And that's been for me building the culture and building relationships. I've really enjoyed that part of where we've got to.
One of the things that stands out for me when I look at sports more widely is this journey we are all on as an industry to evolve, to transform, both in the way we operate and the way we deliver digital, both internally in terms of operational digital efficiency, but also the product and the content we have to deliver now as part of the playbook that every basically sports property needs to create. And that's a pretty ongoing journey that you sort of brought up, Jon, that everyone seems to be going through. One of the things I think is interesting is obviously there is fundamentally, because until relatively recently, most of the commercial components of sport was sold on in licensing agreements and third-party deals, and not a lot of it was done in-house. And what that means for the industry is effectively there's still an ongoing struggle with finding the right expertise with sports experience to deliver some of these projects. So what we have started to see over time is various organizations looking outside of the organization, whether it be for people outside of sports or outside of their company, to find that expertise. One of the things that British Cycling has done has worked with third-party partners like Two Circles and IMG, now more recently with the recent announcement, which we're going to get to bring some expertise, something different to the table that I'm guessing, Jon, you didn't have in-house. How did you come to the decision, and what was that process to go, look, we're going to go externally to see if we can really supercharge, I'm guessing particularly the commercial side of our offering, given what you've talked about. How did you get to that point where, look, we're going to invest in a relationship that's going to really drive that for us versus try and do it yourselves? Because I think that's a tricky predicament for a lot of sporting organizations.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the recognition of the environment, it was changing before the pandemic. I think the pandemic supercharged a lot of that, the way we consume our media and entertainment in particular. So the choice was either we just let things happen to us and then we react and we move forward, or we try and have an element of futurology and get ahead of that. So in the early days, working with our chief commercial officer about taking charge of our own destiny. So we decided to rewrite our narrative, our storytelling ability about what we stood for, the purpose of bringing the joy of cycling to everyone. And it's been a really insightful, but also feels quite fast-moving journey to take back our properties, our IP. So everything now we have, particularly from an event perspective, in-house. We have a wholly owned subsidiary company, British Cycling Events, which effectively is the commercial arm to the organisation. So to reset, to develop our narrative, then to go back out into the market, which we did in January with a high degree of confidence, and to behave differently. And that's what we've done. And that has resulted in a significant partnership with Lloyds Bank as our lead partner, the title partners of our two events, and also a whole host of other brands that have stepped forward and expressed an interest in working with us. We recently announced a strategic partnership with IMG, who will hold our hand, who will guide us, who will offer us advice across many of the commercial areas. So it's been a blend of in-house, taking charge of our destiny, but also being courageous enough to say we're going to need a bit of help and support in particular areas. And that's an evolving journey, Nick. Many other rights holders are on that journey. I don't think it's a right or a wrong answer, but for us, just a sense of focus, determination, and just getting out there and just having the energy and the bravery, and that's not just myself and my team, but my board and our stakeholders. We are still a largely publicly funded organisation, so the ability to have different bits of the business that can behave differently whilst respecting that public funding has been a challenge that we've embraced and navigated through.
It is a really important point and it's not the same model in other countries, but national governing bodies, particularly in the UK, are very heavily government funded as their primary source of revenue or funding to fund its initiatives. Whereas in other markets, like the US as an example, it's hyper commercial. A lot of those organizations are able to or have already established very detailed commercial structures in place to bankroll and fund a lot of those initiatives. Also, they're serving a market for 4 or 5 times the size, which helps as well when you're trying to scale opportunity. So I think that's an important distinction, because it does really change that complexity around decision making, right, Jon? Because you have a layer of impacts and results you need to deliver, particularly in the funding cycles which you are working to. For those, again, that aren't familiar, from my previous experiences through volleyball, was you've got the 4-year, basically the Olympic cycles, which sort of determine the bulk of the funding. There's other funding pots that are made available, and those goalposts can change cycle to cycle depending on the leadership of UK sport, the funding, the government's decision making on how they want to see funding spent, and how they want to measure success, and so on. So you have to navigate that whilst trying to make decisions on how you want to run an organization. And sometimes they can be aligned, and sometimes there can be some tension, to the points we talked about before about whether it's negotiating the right approach to make sure all parties are happy. So that can be quite a tricky ground to work with. And that's why I always say to people that a chief exec in a national governing body in the UK is one of the toughest jobs you could possibly have in sports. But anyway, I won't make you say that, Chris. Sorry, I won't make you say that, Jon. But Chris, I wanted to ask you, just in terms of, say, the decision making that Jon talked about deciding, look, we're going to get some independent third-party expertise on board to help us drive the commercial opportunity we think we have with our organization once we find the right position and approach. But we also want to take, Jon's words were, I can't remember exact words, were basically keep hold of the reins whilst get third-party help to really drive it forward. Obviously, Chris, that's something that you work in quite a lot, where you're brought into organizations. Just at what point do you think it's the right time to seriously entertain going external for that expertise to bring into an organization? Is there a light bulb you think that needs to go off in sometimes in an organization, or is it just when certain signals are perhaps being indicated in the organization's performance?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key ingredients there, and similar to the purpose kind of discussion, what I find is kind of once you have that desired end state, the really next thing that you should look at are what are the key success factors for achieving that end state. A lot of times organizations just kind of jump to a solution or kind of go down a path where they feel like, well, we need industry experience, or on the other side, we have to go outsource something or go to a third party. I think taking that time to critically look at what the success factors are, facing kind of your reality, and then determining this is what we really need. In that planning session, I think it's good to kind of have people who are specifically designated to be that devil's advocate. Why do we need something? We need somebody with deep industry experience. Why? Is that critical to our success? Are there other industries out there that we can point to that may have tackled this already? So should we widen our perspective there? Same way with various skill sets, especially on the technical side. Is that technical skill really what's going to be critical, or maybe soft skills more critical for achieving our success? So really kind of assessing those critical success factors that are aligned then to your goals. And then you can kind of go out and then put the right solution to that. We go into a lot of client organizations. Some bring us in for a technical expertise that we have. Others we look at and say, you have the technical expertise in-house. What you really need is our soft skills and our ability to bring all those together. So if we're just trying to bring in technical skills, we're just layering on top of what you have, and we're not addressing what you really need. So really being able to kind of look into that, figure out what's going to make it successful, and then act on that, I think is a critical step in the process.
Interesting. You definitely have to have a little bit of flexibility going into those conversations by the sounds of it. And Jon, I'm guessing when you spoke to someone like an IMG, the conversation was you didn't probably have a specific, I'm imagining you didn't have a specific playbook in mind per se, because it feels like these days, these types of relationships with major commercial partners or like an IMG, they're quite nuanced now versus what they perhaps were, a decade, 2 decades ago, which is probably acting as a more traditional sales agency. Now they are really into the thick of the detail with you and the company. Just talk a bit more about, what have you actually said? You talked about creating a commercial arm to the organization. Just what does that mean, and what's IMG's mix in that? Is that is it a joint venture between you? Is it completely your own standalone that they're just supporting that specifically? Just how does that work?
Yeah, it's just the IMG relationship is a strategic partnership as opposed to a joint venture. But you're absolutely right. It's not a traditional, here are our assets, try your very best to sell them and come back and deliver a bag full of cash. It's absolutely not that. It's a blend of commercial support and advice, media rights across digital marketing, using the world-renowned experience against our quite ambitious aspirations. And it's also similar to, I reflect on our partnership with Lloyds, of which we are really excited by, a long-term partnership. And there's quite a high degree of co-creation within that. And that's really exciting, because I think if you get the right partnership, so whether it is a commercial partnership that you're acting together to drive revenue, or a partnership where someone is investing in you, to understand each other, to work that out at the start, and to go on a journey together, I think hopefully results in success. But it recognises the very different environment in which we operate. People behave differently. We are seeing it before our eyes in sport and across the rest of society. And it's really interesting from the commercial conversations we're having. It's not simply about visibility. It's not simply about winning gold medals, of which British cycling have done very well across many years. It's about delivering social value. It's about deep resonance in communities. It's about brand association. It's about data. There is no getting away from that. And that, to have someone alongside us to guide, advise, and show a really high degree of agility. And just I'll go back to our strategy, Nick, 'cause I think it's relevant to the question. So new strategy, 4 years, which is a long time in our environment. And I've encouraged the team and the board to adopt 3 principles in our approach. The first is a sense of entrepreneurship, and I think that's quite a different skill set in a national governing body. The second is to have a growth mindset. And the third one is to feel liberated. So I think as human beings, we initially go to the challenge. What's the barriers? What's the obstacles? Well, let's just imagine a world in which they were all removed. And that's prompted some really fantastic discussions, and we're not quite there yet with where we're going to land. And I don't think our strategy will be revolutionary, but it will certainly be different. And it will certainly give us that liberation to behave differently and to be agile over the next 4 years. So it's just embracing that contemporary skills. And Chris is absolutely right about the soft skills. From a leadership perspective, I would always call out complex problem solving as the first soft skill. But things like emotional intelligence are more important now than ever before in the workplace. So it's a sort of trying to get the right blend of all of those. We don't have all the answers. We'll get things wrong, and we're on a very steep learning curve. But if we can get the mix of those, I think it will result in a greater degree of success rather than a lower degree.
Some interesting points there, Jon. Chris, what do you think is the ideal mix now on a leader in this day and age in an organisation? Jon's made some examples there of the soft skills that are required. Is there anything else you would add to that mix of attributes that Jon's is focusing on within his role and within the organisation to ensure that there's really great support and adoption of the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, Jon touched on a number of key ones. I mean, soft skills is a overarching bucket of things, but complex problem solving, I think, is really key. The emotional intelligence that Jon mentioned is key, but you have to be authentic, right? I mean, you have to realize that you're working with people and you're working with systems. There's constraints in there, so bringing all that complex problem solving, the emotional intelligence, I think a good blend of that kind of what we call kind of technical and tactical ability, right? You kind of know the doctrinal or the school book best practices and kind of what's out there, but you have an ability to then look into reality, understand how things kind of work, and be able to practically apply those principles and be comfortable with modifying them to meet your needs. So I think that's you have to be comfortable in doing that. We talk about change and innovation and things like that. Change, and especially organizational change over the years, has seemingly been kind of like this thing that we've got to deal with that's keeping us from getting where we want to go. But really being able to look at, especially with the pace of change, today, that just needs to be a core kind of behavioral aspect of people that you're looking at. How comfortable are you with innovating? You want to be driven by that. right? You want information. You want to be making the best decision all the time. You're not tied to, one thing and kind of ignore what the data may be telling you. So, being able to, especially within the talent area that, Jon was mentioning, getting back to one, being focused on that end state and the goals that we've talked about. But how do you break that down then to say, well, what do our people need from a behavioral standpoint, from a cognitive standpoint? And really being able to factor that in some cases, more importantly than the technical skills they may have, because it's really those cognitive and behavioral attributes that will help you put together winning teams. And the technical piece, especially if folks have high cognitive ability, will come along. And with the pace of change, a technical skill that somebody may be firmly rooted in today may be obsolete tomorrow. So they become less and less important, specific technical skills, unless, again, you look at the critical success factor and says, we don't have time to learn new technology and we need, or new process, and we need somebody that can come in right now and is deeply rooted in that, right? Then you're making that informed decision that says that technical ability is far more critical to our success than, one of the soft skills that we just mentioned.
Leaning into this complex problem solving you've both talked about is decision making. And we've touched upon a little bit already. Just how, Jon, have you found when you need to be decisive and give people a decision, because sometimes you get pressure for decisions to be made quickly. And how do you balance, I need more information first before I make a decision? Because I think that can be a tricky balance of being patient to make a call on something. I mean, obviously it depends on the scenario, but in general terms, maybe in general business situation rather than big strategic ones, how do you balance between using your experience to make a quick decision and getting enough information to make the decision and maybe taking a little bit longer and keep everyone at bay and everyone happy with how the approach has been taken?
I think, first of all, Nick, is to accept you can't please all the people all the time. That's just the nature of leadership. And I guess I'm 30 years almost into my career working in sport. I had such a privileged career, but I'm still learning. And one of the things I'm learning is to have a bit more patience and try and involve more people in more of the decisions. And sometimes you can do that, and sometimes you can't. And that depends on the situation and the degree of urgency. But just going back to a couple of things that Chris has said, because I think it's highly relevant. I remember probably now 3 years ago having my performance appraisal with my chair, and he said, you're doing well. He said, but one thing you should work on is showing a higher degree of vulnerability. And I went away from that conversation really confused, and I thought, I'm not quite sure what he means. And I went home and I looked up in one of the dictionaries what vulnerability meant, the dictionary definition, and it says something like expose yourself to harm. And I thought, gosh, I'm not sure I really fancy that, and still didn't understand it. And it was only through some of my experiences in the latter months that I truly understood vulnerability. And I think it's a great soft skill for leaders to have. And I've tried to sort of remember that moment and that sort of light bulb moment in some of the decision making and looking to involve people. And I have a soft contract with my senior team. I shared it with them in the first week I was at British Cycling, and it's TLC, not tender loving care, but trust, loyalty, and the C, we can cheat a little bit because it can be a blend of curiosity, it can be collaboration, it can be communication, it can be courage, and it can also be challenge. And I quite like to be challenged, and I think that in decision making then does result in a good blend. You can be challenged and agree to disagree, or be challenged and show a level of vulnerability to say, actually, you know what, I'm wrong, you're right, and that's something that we should integrate into our decision making. So, no one has the perfect answer to the question, Nick. We're all still learning as we go, and I'm delighted to say after 30 years, I still have an unquenchable desire and thirst to learn, and I think that hopefully makes me a better leader.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the future then. You've talked about the fact that you've got a 4-year strategy. It's a long-term strategy. Can you just give a bit more of a sense of what that looks like? What does the future look like for you and for British Cycling from here?
I think, first of all, to continue to do some of the things we do extraordinarily well. We have an incredible performance director, performance team, our GB team continue to do amazing things. We run a fully integrated Olympic and Paralympic program. We'd love to kick on and do more. We'd love to do that and drive social value. I think that is absolutely the direction of travel that we are heading in. There's I call it the golden triangle, Nick, between sport, health and transport. And I'd like us to have a greater part to play in that. The UK, I guess, similar to many other developed nations, incredibly poor levels of health inequalities, also embarrassing levels of productivity and growth. And whilst British Cycling aren't going to change that overnight, I think we can play a contribution to that. And just giving people great experiences. The joy of cycling, if we never lose sight of our purpose, and we can provide those great experiences, then I think we'll be about in the right place. But also balancing that by all the business things we need to get to financial stability. We aren't at that point. We probably need to take more risk, hence why the structure we've set our business up. We need to attract more commercial partners. We need to keep being bold and brave.
So to achieve that, you've talked about before this new commercial arm or entity that's been created. How separate is that? Because I've got other examples I can think of that come to mind across the sports landscape where they are run as really separate in terms of different chief execs, different staff, everything, so on and so forth. And other is just an entity to be able to run basically a separate P&L from the rest of the organization to be able to deliver and measure success properly and focus on proper commercialization and optimization of the assets you want to tackle. What's that mix look like? What isn't in the new commercial property, I suppose, and what is that approach?
Yeah, we're attempting to do a hybrid of what you just described, so not completely separate and completely at arm's length and not fully integrated. So the ability within a group to have three pieces, the national governing body doing exactly what people will know and understand, the commercial arm to the business, and then the third bit is charity. So effectively we can be public, private and third sector at any one time. The success of this will be as a group and each supporting each other. And sure, there's some governance bits to work through, there's some people bits to work through, but that togetherness I think will be successful if we can keep focusing on that and appreciate there'll be some challenges, there'll be some friction, some tension. We already have two separate boards, one for British Cycling, one for British Cycling Events. But that enables different skill sets, different talent. We've got lots of people on our British Cycling board who have years and years of wisdom of cycling. We've got lots of people on our commercial board that bring that commercial acumen and skill set. So if we can get the right blend of all of that as a group, then I'm pretty sure that we're going to kick on and move forward in the right direction.
Well, Jon, it sounds like you've got an exciting journey till now, and I think you've got an exciting journey ahead of you to see how all this shapes up. But look, I really appreciate you joining us today to give us a sense of some of the things you're working on with British Cycling and a bit of a look at the past as well. And thanks for your time today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Nick, and thanks very much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Jon. Thanks for your time and also being a great example of how to win. So I think it really supports this series. So thank you.